Good afternoon. This is for Unit 10, Psychological Perspectives. I'm Claire Champion, and this is what we're going to talk about in the session today. There are 8 psychological perspectives mainly used today. We've got the biological perspective, which is looking at the behaviour linked to the brain and to genetics. There's behaviourist, which is obviously to do with behaviour learned through the environment. Psychodynamic, unconscious drives and childhood experiences. Humanistic, which is talking about personal growth and the self-concept and free will. Cognitive, focusing on the thinking processes of the brain. Social learning, which is looking at the learning from observation from others, and there's a social cultural behaviour influenced by culture and society around us. So I'm going to talk about psychodynamic and humanistic approaches to psychology, and looking at how the differences and overlapping similarities are. So psychodynamic and humanistic perspectives differ significantly in their foundation, yet they are overlapping in some particular areas. They originate from very different ends of the spectrum, so sort of one end to the other, and commonly meet in the middle. Psychodynamic perspectives is looking at the unconscious drives, talking about childhood experiences, things that people have come from their past. And the humanistic approach is looking at personal growth, the self-concept, free will, and I've chosen to do these ones because these are the ones I can relate to the most, and I can see benefits of them both in today's society too. So we're going to be covering 6 key main areas, and we'll be looking at the psychodynamic psychology, key theorists in there, the pros and the cons, and the key assumptions about what the psychodynamic approach is. We'll look at the humanistic psychology, exactly the same sort of thing, evaluating the work of the key theorists, looking at the pros and cons, and looking at the differences between them and the similarities, the next 2 sections. And then we'll look at psychology today and how these particular perspectives are in today's society and how they're used in therapy today. And then we'll have a summary at the end. So psychoanalysis or psychodynamic psychology is the theory and therapeutic approach developed by Sigmund Freud. Now, Sigmund Freud wrote his paper, The Theory of the Unconscious Mind, in 1915, and he sort of divided that into sort of 3 levels, talking about the conscious mind, the pre-conscious and the unconscious, and we'll look at those in a bit further in a minute. There's also Carl Jung, who was his one of his key students. So the psychodynamic approach, or the psychoanalysis, focuses on unconscious thoughts. So it's thinking about early childhood experiences, past experiences, unresolved tensions in the brain, internal conflicts we might not even be aware of, that have affected us and shaped who we are. They shape the behaviour, emotions, and the personality. And therapists often more interpretive and an analytical approach. Psychological theory and therapeutic approach was developed by Sigmund Freud, as I already said, and he believed that the unconscious mind was a reservoir of thoughts, feelings, memories, and desires that are inaccessible to conscious awareness. So we're not aware of those feelings. The concept of the collective unconscious is less widely understood, but that came from Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung. So he was the most famous and controversial student of Freud and developed the concept of the collective unconscious. Term was first used in 1916 in his published essay, The Structure of the Unconscious. So Freud, as I said, wrote The Unconscious Mind in 1914, and this was his key metaphysiological, psychological essays, published as part of a series of papers in 1915, which he laid out the foundations for his theory. So his theory, as we mentioned earlier, is divided into three areas, but also three key sort of personality traits, I suppose, as well. And so his three levels of the mind include the conscious mind, also interpreted as the ego. The ego operates largely in the conscious mind, and that mediates impulses, and it's looking more at the reality and how things work out today, and how you are thinking about things today, and most realistic ways to satisfy whatever it is that you're aiming to do. The pre-conscious mind is information we can access when needed. So this could be memories, it could be knowledge. So it's not constantly in the forefront of our minds, but we can access it when we need it. The superego. So you've got the ego, the superego, and the id. So the superego spans across all three of these. So you can find that in the conscious mind, the preconscious, and the unconscious. And that's looking at our morals, our principles, things we've learned from our parents and society and culture, and can influence our conscious thoughts as well as the others. So the unconscious mind, also known can be known as the id, represents our biological urges. So this is really encourages us to be impulsive, the things that contain our instincts, things that we don't necessarily sort of fight or flight, things we don't really consciously know that we have, but we just kicks in automatically. And that operates without us being aware of that. Carl Jung, he wrote his seminal paper in 1916, and that was called The Structure of the Unconscious. It first introduced the idea then of the collective unconscious and archetypes. Now, Jung proposed that the collective unconscious is inherited layer of the psyche passed down through the structures of the brain. So he sort of, as we've developed as human beings, these things have come along and added to and grown as we've come further on in age. He argues that it contains not only ancient patterns of human experience, but also remnants of behaviours from our ancestors, early animal ancestors. He described the mind as having loads of archetypes, and the archetypes are a universal pattern or template that appear in human thoughts, like feelings, stories, behaviours, etc. And this number is unlimited. It can have as many human situations as there are, will reflect the amount of behaviours and the amount of archetypes that we have. And again, individual to each person. But he had 4 central ones that he thought were what drove us. And so the first one is the persona. So persona is what is that which is in reality not, sorry, the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as others would think one is. So it's sort of like the mask. So what we show to people every day, it's our front-facing personality, our society, the identity that we want to show to the public. His second one, he called the shadow. So this is our hidden or rejected parts of ourselves, the impulses or instincts that we prefer not to people to see. So the things that we keep hidden. So the shadow personifies everything that the subject refuses to acknowledge about themselves. Number 3, classed as the anima or the animus, depending on male or female, and this is our inner opposite. So representing emotional life, intuition, and a balance. So the anima in men and the animus in women are inner archetypes that guide psychological growth and the quest for wholeness. And the final one that he classed as one of the main archetypes is the self. So it's the center of the whole personality. So this is us, symbol of wholeness and integration. So the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. This is the whole body. Pros and cons of psychodynamic psychology. The pros, they explore the underlying causes of certain actions and support lasting change, so we can develop further from that. Also, it helps to improve self-awareness, so we get an insight on what triggers our feelings and our behaviours. Effective for depression, anxiety, and personality disorders, but its long-term benefits, they, can be seen years later once we understand ourselves. Cons, it can be time consuming, takes months or years to be able to understand those things that trigger us. It could be is less structured than other therapies. It doesn't always fix the behaviour, but it helps emotionally, and not one size fits all. One approach to this does not fit all. So the humanistic psychology, opposite end of the spectrum, the phrase was coined in 1958 by Cohen, who was a British psychologist, but it was developed in the USA by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow during the 1950s and 60s, and it focused on the whole person, personal growth, positive choices, and recognising human potential. And it was a reaction against psychoanalysis and the behaviourism perspectives. So the main focus is, of this therapy tends to be non-directive, client-led. Client leads a session. It feels warm and collaborative, and they focus on self-collaboration, not diagnosis. Centered around the therapeutic relationship, and the therapist's role is to provide that safe, accepting space, so that people can look deeply into how they are. Key people in here, as I said, we've got Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, who developed this in the 1950s and 60s, and the phrase was coined by Cohen. So Maslow created the hierarchy of needs, and he focused mainly on the needs of the human themselves to be able to reach their maximum potential. And he proposed that the basic needs have to be met before it's possible to reach that full potential. He explained that human motivation is shaped by a series of needs arranged in a hierarchy from bottom to top, starting with psychological needs. So it's these basic requirements such as food, water, rest, and shelter. And once those needs have been addressed, you then want to have the safety needs, so the security and stability, and show that they're protection from any harm. Once these two are built up, we can then go on to love and belonging. So this is having friendships, relationships, family bonds, and a sense of connection. The next level up is esteem needs. So you need to be able to think that there's achievement. You've found you're getting something from things, and you've got respect from others, self-respect, and recognition. Once we've received, or in receipt of all of those kinds of things, you'll be able to reach self-actualization. So this is fulfilling your potential. So going for that job that you didn't think you could do, or that promotion, and becoming the best version of oneself. He suggested that when the more fundamental needs are reasonably satisfied, people can go on to pursue higher levels of psychological growth and fulfillment. Carl Rogers developed the person-centered therapy. Rogers focused on how we have a unique perspective of the world, and how that perspective shapes our lives. The therapeutic relationship is built on trust. It needs to be genuine, have a genuine connection, and safe. He believed that the unconditional positive regard, so it's warm acceptance without judgment, empathy, so that you can see that the person had put themselves in your position. He suggested there was an important distinction between self-concept and the ideal self. So you've got the concept of how you think you are, and the ideal self, how you want to be seen. His landmark paper was in 1951, landmark book, Central Client-Centered Therapy. He published the concept of self and the importance of understanding personality. Pros and cons for this humanistic approach: emphasizes on dignity. So pros emphasizes on dignity and autonomy, personal meaning, highly respectful and empowering. It's got strong evidence of value of therapeutic relationship, and it's useful for personal development, not just mental health treatment. The cons, sometimes seen as too idealistic, looking too much for a utopia that maybe cannot be achieved. It's less structured than other therapies, and it's harder to test scientifically. So the main differences, as you can see from this table, there are quite a few differences. View of human nature. So humans are driven by, with psychodynamic, humans are driven by unconscious conflicts, instincts, and early experiences, whereas the humanistic approach, they're inherently good, motivated towards growth and self-actualization. If we look down further, we've got the view of behavior. So the behavior of a psychodynamic perspective is that it's determined by internal forces outside of our conscious control, whereas the humanistic approach reflects on free will and choice and the drive to reach that personal fulfillment. So similarities, there are quite a few similarities in these approaches. So with the view of the human nature, again, they both focus on the individual as a whole person. Each perspective considers the subjective experience of a person and not observable behaviour. Going down, role of the unconscious. So they both acknowledge that internal processes influence behaviour, but psychodynamic emphasis unconscious motives and making it you're driven by the unconscious past experiences, but the humanistic is about thoughts and feelings and self-perception and how you see yourself and how you can make that change. Also the goals of therapy. So the therapeutic ways we deal with these, they're both aimed at improving psychological well-being. Both focus it, the psychodynamic resolving inner conflicts, whereas the humanistics looking at improving self-esteem and self-actualization. So in psychology today, trauma and attachment problems, a lot of the issues applied today, anxiety disorders, relationship difficulties, and childhood experiences that have never been addressed. These are the sort of modern therapies inspired by these perspectives. And the psychodynamic approach in today's society, again, looking at the anxiety disorders, relationship difficulties, strengths of that be highlighted, the influences of early experiences, but it also lacks scientific testability. Humanistic approach, contemporary issues resulting in looking at self-esteem and identity issues. It's more of a counselling and person-centred therapy, positive psychological and wellbeing programs, and the strengths of sort of looking at person-centred therapies are widely used today. It's non-judgmental and accessible. Some of the cons could be that all the weaknesses be hard to measure scientifically, which is a similarity of the other one as well. So in summary, the psychodynamic perspective is valuable for understanding deep-rooted emotional issues and trauma, but it's less effective for quick, structured treatments of conditions like anxiety and depression. Humanistic perspective is extremely valuable for counselling, self-esteem work and improving well-being, but it's less effective for serious clinical disorders. It is best suited for empowering clients. So in summary, the overlapping similarities include both depth-orientated approaches go beyond the surface of the behaviour. Both see behaviour as meaningful rather than random. Key differences, we've got psychodynamics, more interpreter, and the expert, the therapist's role is the interpreter or the expert, whereas the humanistic approach, they're more of a facilitator and an equal partner, helping you develop yourself. Thank you very much for listening.